Well, good morning, everybody. Morning. Thank you, everybody's here that's coming. So, welcome to this little 2-day workshop that I'm doing this Sunday and next Sunday on family systems theory. My goal with this mini workshop is to give you basically a basic understanding of, or review, if you know about family systems already, that can be helpful for you as you explore your spiritual family tree or just reflect on the relationships in your family. I've made sure you all have notes there if you want a clipboard to make it easier to write on. We have some of those sitting over here as well, and I'll make sure that we have extras for next time. So I want to start just by asking the question, what is family systems thinking? And essentially, family systems is a lens. Those of you who have glasses, what does a lens do? Yeah, it helps you focus, it magnifies. It's something that you look through that shapes the way that you see the world. And it's the same thing with family systems thinking. This is a different way of looking at relationships. Family systems thinking recognizes that our families are a complex, dynamic force in our lives. All of our relationships are interconnected like a spider web or a mobile. And the way that we relate to the people in our family, in our work, in our church, affects who we are and how we act and function. But the more that we understand how these relationships shape us, the more we can respond in calm ways that have a positive impact on our families and our own emotional and spiritual health. So my background with family systems, I first heard about it in Luther Seminary, in my pastoral care and counseling classes, and then my internship pastor and I read this book together, Generation to Generation, by A Family Process in Church and Synagogue by Edwin Friedman. And since then, I've talked about it with other pastors and used the concepts in my basic level of counseling that I do with people in various churches. I've also been to a couple of workshops on family systems, including a 9-month clergy seminar led by Larry Foster called Family Process and Natural Systems, Leadership in Family Emotional Processes. So in that seminar, we reflected on how we saw family systems at work in our own families and in our congregations. Because essentially a congregation is a family of families. And that's especially true here with this congregation, where it was founded by a group of families that all came over together from Germany. Then I've also used family systems as part of my doctorate ministry studies, where I explored how God's story shapes the stories of our lives and relationships. So starting in 2 weeks, we are going to explore our spiritual family trees. How many of you have explored your family tree? Or maybe you have somebody in your family who loves to do genealogy research and that sort of thing. You can find out a lot about yourselves that way. There was a NBC and TLC have a show that they put on. I think it went for like 11 seasons, called Who Do You Think You Are? And they would take celebrities and research their background, all of their family history, and they were a lot of times these celebrities were amazed at the things that they found back in their families that have shaped them, even though they didn't realize it. So spiritual family trees, this it's based on a helpful little book by Barbara Wendland and Larry Easterling that walks through a process of exploring and drawing the tree of relationships and events and experiences that have shaped your spiritual journey and faith. You can learn a lot about yourself when you look closely at your family, because you can find all sorts of repeating patterns of health or unhealth. You can find the book on Amazon, or I can order you one if you're interested. You don't need one to be able to explore your family tree, because your spiritual family tree, because I'll give you the explanation. But it's a helpful little book. In one of the chapters, the authors give a little background on family systems thinking. They outline 5 different basic concepts of family systems. So today and next Sunday, I'm going to give you a little history on the development of family systems thinking, and then we'll dig into each of the 5 main concepts that get highlighted in that book. We'll talk about ways that you can use these ideas for looking at your own family systems and your spiritual journey. So please feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point along the way. Ready? So family systems thinking is basically a way of seeing how relationships work. There are all sorts of different kinds of systems, of course. There's mechanical systems like a mobile, where everything is all connected. Because what happens if you touch one part of the mobile? Everything else moves. And that's like our families as well. There's also organizational systems, like a hierarchy. This is how everything flows through our our system of government. And then there's also systems like a flow chart that gets used. These are tips on how to design a better hiring process. You do this or you do this, and it goes here, 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 here. There's also natural systems, like the Earth as a complex, interrelated system. There's all these different systems at work. Our climate, our water cycle, our land use, the carbon cycle, ecosystems, and human contributions and responses. So we can't understand some systems with linear thinking. It's more than just cause and effect. The way some systems work has more to do with how the parts are interconnected and affect each other. Their relationships, or you can think of it as ecology. As machines and organizations have gotten more complex, some people have started using systems thinking to help analyze what's going on. Sometimes it's called black box thinking. Like, you have a problem that you can't see inside, and so you try to figure out what's going on by what comes out. Example of that is like how to troubleshoot a computer. If you see this dreaded blue screen of death on your computer, you can't just open up the computer and look at it and say, oh, that's what's wrong. You have to try and figure out what to do by looking at the error code, and then getting the help that you need, using that code to try and figure out what's going on. Medical and psychiatric professions have started to see the benefit of using systems thinking in their own areas. They've started looking at people's family histories, for example. This is what's called a medical genogram. Maybe some of you have, as you've been consulting with a doctor, they've had you do something like this, where they trace, my grandpa had heart disease, my mom has diabetes, there's cancer on this side of the family, all that sort of thing. They chart that out, and then they get a better sense of how those patterns maybe affecting you. If you have a family history of alcohol abuse or heart disease or schizophrenia, even things like divorce and affairs, abandonment, overly high expectations, anger issues, and so forth. Things that tend to run in your family give insight into what forces are at work in your life. Of course, relationships don't run on engineering, mathematics, but on emotions and instinctive responses. We're learning more and more how much we share in common with the rest of nature, especially other animals. Nature gives us clues about how we as humans function. I remember watching some of the series Planet Earth as you've never seen it before, and so much of it I could relate to, like families and large groups being pursued by an enemy, tribes making their way, migrating, finding new land, just like all the people from the families from Germany that came here. We've also learned a lot in recent years about how the human brain works. That there are all these different parts of the brain that work together but have some specialized functions. The brain stem, which is in orange, does all these automatic processes like your breathing, your heartbeat, and so forth. The medulla, which is part of that, handles your instinctive responses like fight or flight. The cerebellum in purple there controls your motor skills and your sense of balance. And then the cerebrum, the other four parts, the larger part of the brain, that's kind of the thinking part of the brain that we share with other mammals. The temporal lobe in green is how helps us with our hearing and interpreting sound. The yellow part, the occipital lobe, helps us process visual information. The parietal lobe in red handles touch and numbers and deeper thought like theology and income tax preparation. The frontal lobe is kind of the brakes of the mature brain. It helps us think through consequences and choosing between good and bad. That's the part of the brain that develops last in adolescence, which explains a whole lot of why it's a good idea for young kids not to be experimenting with drugs and with alcohol, and that they tend to make bad decisions on their own if they don't have a firm hand. So all these scientific discoveries teach us things about how we function. Watching natural processes can help us recognize and understand patterns of behavior and dynamics in our family, in our organizations and churches. Family systems thinking emphasizes process rather than content. For example, if you get asked by someone, "How are you feeling today?" it's not just one or the other. You don't just say, "Oh, I'm sick," or "I'm well." There's a whole range of things. Kind of a continuum of health and emotional wellness or illness and anxiety levels. You might feel fine, but you actually might have problems that you don't know about yet. Or you can feel terrible, like you've got a cold or something, but that's just your healthy body fighting off something. A symptom, like sneezing, is an exaggeration of a natural reaction. Your allergies, for example, are when your body is trying to respond to something that's wrong, but it overreacts and makes things seemingly worse. It's your body's attempt to resolve something. Symptoms like that can be a useful wake-up call. So there's all sorts of different ways of treating physical symptoms. what are some of the different sorts of doctors that we see?
Seems they're all in specialty right now.
Yeah, so there are some, general practice
Yeah.
Somebody go to the yellow pages.
physicians.
General practitioner.
Yeah, you look in the yellow pages and you find all kinds of different specialties. You go to surgeons. What other kinds of medical practitioners are there?
Dentists.
Dentists,
Vision.
vision, yep, optometrists,
Brain surgeon.
brain surgeons,
Gynecologist.
yep,
Major
Yep.
organs, heart specialist, kidney specialist.
yeah. For different organs in your body, there's specialists for those. There's also chiropractors and holistic practitioners. In the same way, there's also all sorts of different approaches to treating mental illness. You can go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst. That particular field started with Sigmund Freud. We'll talk about him a little bit later. Or you can go see a counselor or a social worker, among others. The family systems approach began with a guy named Murray Bowen, who was a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health in the 1960s. He started to see that patients were greatly affected by their network of relationships, especially their family of origin. And so he started looking at therapy differently. Instead of just treating the person, he started treating the whole family. He would have them bring their family in and talk with them together. And so he developed some new concepts around this idea of family systems. Another guy who kind of expanded on that was a guy named Edwin Friedman, who actually was a Jewish rabbi, but also a counselor. And he studied with Bowen and then applied those concepts to churches, because a church is really a family of families, as we talked about. He wrote this book called Generation to Generation, and another one called A Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of Quick Fix. And we'll talk a lot more about some of his insights in a little bit. Then there was another guy who worked in family systems called Peter Steinke. And he wrote those two little books on the end down there called How Your Church Family Works and Healthy Congregations. There's now a training center by that name in Columbus, Ohio. Steinke's books are often used to help congregations wade through turmoil or just to become healthy enough to deal with conflict well when it comes along. His books really help equip leaders with family systems ideas. So in this book, Spiritual Family Trees, they highlight 5 different family systems concepts. First of all, the identified patient, homeostasis, differentiation of self, emotional triangles, and intergenerational repetition. We're going to go over each of these concepts in turn, maybe a couple of them today and the rest of them next week. Any questions so far on what we've been talking about? Or thoughts about how it applies to your life?
I just looked at brain. I mean, only God.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
it works.
It's absolutely amazing. And how our brains can, if they're injured, they can adapt and kind of rewire and themselves to make up for it. But that it, so being injured in one particular part can affect the whole thing too.
I believe with Alzheimer's that depending on what part of the brain is affected,
Right.
you're trying to expect what the behaviors might be.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So this first concept of the identified patient, what's kind of the stereotypical picture of counseling?
Couch.
Yeah. Lay on the couch and you tell the therapist about your problems. What sorts of questions do they ask?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong?
Your childhood.
Tell me about your childhood.
Who do you hate? Or
Yeah.
why do you hate 'em?
Right? Yep. What sorts of, what's going on in your life? Where, what are you anxious about? What are you worried about? Where do you have conflict in your family or your friends? What's bringing you here? What do you want to talk about? And then what's their usual follow-up question? So, how does that make you feel? Yes, exactly. So, Sigmund Freud, who started the idea of psychoanalysis, thought that most neuroses had to do with the patient's relationship with his or her mother. Which makes sense because your mother has a huge impact on you from a very early age. She's the one that usually gives the most care to you, and depending on how your relationship was with her or is with her, that can really have a huge impact on you. He also focused on one-on-one treatment, that the psychoanalyst and the patient would dig through the patient's earliest memories to try and get at the core of what's going on. And so that was a very individualistic focus. And that really shaped how psychiatric therapy was done. It's this idea of, okay, we've got this individual who's come in, how do we fix this person's mental problems and symptoms? This is the patient. But researchers like Murray Bowen began to see that there's more at work than just individual problems. We can't just see the patient who's going to counseling or therapy as the sick one, because each person is part of a network of relationships. You can think of it kind of like a network of a system of underground pipes. If pressure starts to build in the whole system, it's going to spring a leak at the most interconnected point. Not necessarily the weakest point, but at the spot where most connections come together. That's where the pressure will kind of pop the most. And so that person, where suddenly a leak springs, is what we call the identified patient. It's where the family's stress and illness and pathology is surfacing.
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah.
Well, but just the main idea that it's not the weakest point. You're saying in the family, not the
Right.
weakest point, but
Yep.
where what?
The emotional system
Uh-huh.
of the family, the network of relationships. So the person that, kind of starts to act out or starts developing some neuroses or something like that, it's not necessarily just their individual thing, but it's a symptom of something that's going on in the whole network of relationships, and that person is like at the spot where they're the most interconnected, and so the pressure has kind of built up the most in them, and so they start to act out or experience those things kind of on behalf of the whole system of relationships. And it's not because they're the weakest one, it's just they're the one where the pressure builds up the most.
And sometimes you could identify, is it a chemical reaction? Like
Yeah.
bipolar, is it there's a chemical
Sure,
imbalance going
sure.
on,
There's
or
all
is it
sorts of
something
different
else,
things that feed into it, so sometimes it can be an individual, chemical, or they had some sort of trauma in the past, that sort of thing. But a lot of times, it's more about the whole system of relationships that they're a part of, and that they're connected to a whole lot of people, and so they're kind of like all of that fear, anger, rage, anxiety, whatever, is surfacing in them. So it's not just the identified patient's problem. It has to do with the system, the family, all of those relationships as a whole. Interestingly, they found that you could replace that part, you could replace that person, and the same thing would happen. For example, like in a business, if there's unhealth going on in the whole system, the whole company, if this particular supervisor suddenly acts out, starts misbehaving, whatever, if you replace them with somebody else, sometimes that person will have the same sort of reaction because they're part of this unhealthy system, and they're the ones that get the brunt of all of the anxiety or pain. So the bigger issue is, how do you bring down the pressure in the entire system? You have to change the way in which they're interconnected. Another way of thinking of it, does that make sense? Questions about that? Yeah.
It just reminds me of the classroom.
Okay.
You could have
Yes,
somebody
yes.
that acts up, but
Uh-huh.
if that one happens to move or something,
Right.
there will always be somebody else that
Yeah.
that acts up.
Yeah. Another way of thinking about it is like in your body,
Person's healthy.
every part of your body is connected to all the rest. If your skin is turning yellow, it's not just a problem with your skin, it's likely caused by your liver. Pain in your jaw can be caused by angina, which is blockage in the arteries to your heart. Ed Friedman, in his book here, Generation to Generation, says, problems in any organ can be related to excessive overfunctioning, underfunctioning, or dysfunctioning of another part. And so, focusing on symptoms alone, or on a dysfunctional part in isolation from the rest of the body, will only bring short-term relief. You have to get at the underlying causes, which have to do with the whole system. The identified patient may not be the person with whom the counselor needs to work. Instead, the counselor needs to figure out who has the greatest capacity to bring change to the whole system. Maybe you know someone like that in your family. Someone who has good connections with lots of the family and has a lot of influence on them in good ways or in bad ways. That person can have the biggest, if that person changes the way that they relate to everybody else, it can have an enormous effect on the whole family, on the whole web of relationships. Our relationships shape us, especially our families of origin. So it's really important for us to go back home to understand how we function in those relationships. It's really helpful to reconnect and look at how we're part of the emotional dynamics in our family. For example, how do people in your family react when their anxiety goes up?
It just,
It's grouchy.
No, go ahead.
what?
Go ahead.
No, she was talking.
Oh, okay.
More work gets done.
More work gets done?
Yes.
Okay.
When you're talking about farming, you gotta
It's
have
like-
anxiety or you won't get
There's
nothing done.
anxiety, and so everybody buckles down. Okay, what else? When anxiety goes up in your family, how else do people react to it?
Hopefully.
What-
People
let go with anger or screaming or yelling.
Okay, so some people might respond real verbally, real outwardly. Yep.
Can be positive or negative.
Yes, positive or yeah. So there's the cheerleader, and there's the negative Nelly or whatever. How else do families respond to anxiety? Yeah.
Sometimes like drama builds
Right.
on each other.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
some person gets mad, and
Mhm.
then this person gets like even more mad and just like towers.
Yep. So sometimes it ramps up.
Yeah. And you know how to
Yep.
push the button.
Blame each other.
You start blaming each other. You start pointing the finger and saying you're the one who's causing all this.
Hey, you started it.
Some people
Yeah.
withdraw instead of lashing out. They like go off. They run away from it.
And then they build on that, so the next time they could.
Yep. So sometimes it kind of escalates that, they only take so much and then. Other people not only, distance themselves, go all quiet, but they even like cut themselves off from the family because they just can't handle what's going on.
Speak to each other for years.
Right. They stop talking to each other. What are other ways that you've seen your family or other families handle conflict?
By talking about it and being.
Yes, that's the most helpful. Actually, we need to sit down and talk about this because this is not going anywhere good.
Put the brakes on and look at it.
Yeah. Everybody calm down. Let's talk this through. Yeah.
Sometimes I think people surrender and just, surrender to.
Yep. They just kind of okay. This is just how we are as a family, or just give up. Yep. How about you personally? How do you react when you are when you're in the midst of conflict?
I
Take the
remember.
tractor and go to the back 40.
Go out and do something. All right.
Sometimes the Irish
Nobody
temper-
bothers me.
Sometimes you lash out. Let your temper get the worst of you. I tend a lot of times to kind of quiet and not talk, or the reverse. I lash out, which is and neither one of those things is helpful.
What's wrong with you? Why are you making it's all
Yeah.
your fault.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
It also changes as you age and mature.
How so?
When I was younger, I would keep everything internal and keep quiet, and now I don't.
Okay. You're more likely to speak out.
Sometimes it's the reverse. You mellow out more as you get older.
Sure. Yep. You kind of see, this is not my first time at the rodeo.
Right.
We can make it through this.
Right.
Sometimes life is just too short. You need to get past this.
Yes,
You need to work it out.
absolutely. More of a sense of if we don't deal with this, it's not going to get work. It's not going to get better. Yep. What are ways that you like react instinctively out of habit? Or talk about somebody else in your family, and what are some kind of knee-jerk responses that you often see from some other people?
You feel hurt.
So kind of taking it personally. Yep.
Sometimes you can try to be the go-between and fix things, and it just doesn't.
You get caught in the middle,
You have to realize that you can't.
running here, running there, trying to.
You gotta trust God to fix some things.
That's right. Sometimes it's beyond what we can do.
There's a hymn like that, isn't there?
A bunch of them. One particular you're thinking
Yeah.
of? Yeah.
Trust and obey.
Yeah.
Trust and obey.
So think about your own life, your own habits of dealing with people. If there's a particular way or a couple of different ways that you just instinctively tend to react when anxiety goes up or conflict flares or whatever, what might happen if you chose to act differently next time and didn't just give in to that knee-jerk reaction, but actually put some thought into it, or even thought through it ahead of time so that when you actually got in the moment, you might be able to say, you know, I'd normally react like this, but what if I did this instead? Our relationships shape us, but we can also shape our relationships by how we respond. The whole family system is interrelated. Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 12. He says, the body is a unit, though it is made up of many parts. And though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. You are the body of Christ, and each one of you is part of it. God has arranged the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. You can see the family system's thinking right there. We're all interconnected. You know, in not just our families, but in the family of God, the family of Christ, the body of Christ. So the identified patient in a family is not necessarily the person with the problem. More often, the problem has to do with the way that the whole family system is functioning. What questions or thoughts do you have about that identified patient concept?
Sometimes if you just pray about it, the Holy Spirit, let the Holy Spirit work, it means a lot, it'll help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Prayer is a great way of centering and getting better perspective and help from the great physician, the great psychologist.
I think sometimes a little trouble with faith in that area, because we have two individuals who haven't spoken for years, and you know you can't fix it, the guy has to fix it. It's like,
Right.
God doesn't force himself on anybody. So
Yep.
they have to be willing,
Yeah.
you know, to let God work with them. So it's hard to have faith that God's going to fix this, because he can't fix it unless they open up.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and yet God can do all things, so I have a little bit of confusion with that. You know?
When we're in conflict with someone, we spend a lot of time thinking about our role, their role, and, you know, being angry with the other person and dwelling on the things that they have done and said that have made the situation so bad. And it's
Yeah.
so humbling
Yeah.
to go to God and say, even just show me my role in this. Because,
That's a brave prayer.
yeah, because we don't really want it to be our fault. It's hard to admit that,
Mhm.
but just that first step of just, God, show me, put up that mirror
Yeah.
and show me my role.
Exactly, because every relationship is a two-way street.
You
And
can forgive,
and more
but
than
it's
that.
hard to forget.
Yeah. Yep. It is. It is. Only God is able to forgive and forget.
You know, and just stay back there instead of going forward. You know, you just keep dwelling on yesterday. You know?
Yeah. It's so easy for us to just hold grudges for a long time. You know, we've been hurt over and over. Why on earth should I give that person another chance? Why should I even give them that time of day? But God wants there to be healing in our relationships. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of it's kind of a funny example, but we were not teenagers anymore, but I said, "Oh, shut up," to my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "You shut up." And my mother said, I wouldn't even say shut up to my dog. And we all started laughing, and it just laughed. The whole thing became very
Yes.
funny.
Yes.
And then years later, I used that many times in my classroom. The
Right.
kids would say shut up, and I said, I wouldn't even say shut up to my dog. Then, of course, they wanna know if I had a dog. The whole thing would always become very light.
Sometimes just injecting a little humor
Yeah.
can make a big difference.
Uh-huh.
You know, in how
Change the atmosphere.
right. Yep, it can change the atmosphere. You know, not if you're, you know, mocking the other person or being sarcastic with the humor. That just kind of escalates it a lot of times. But if it's, you know, it can be kind of disarming.
It was.
Yeah. We actually heard about that in our Bible reading today. I mentioned that in my sermon, that this woman came to Jesus and asking for help, and she was a Gentile. She, was a woman. That she had all these strikes against her, and Jesus said, "No, it's not right to give the children's food to the dogs." Basically, called her a dog, and she said, but instead of lashing back at him, saying, "Who are you calling a dog?" Instead of that, she just said, "Yes, Lord. You're right. I don't have a claim on you. I'm a dog. But even dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs."
I'm thinking of the old cartoon where the kid doesn't want the food and purposely throws it down to the dog.
Right? Yeah. And Jesus responded to her by saying, "For saying that, you can go. The demon has left your daughter."
There's also this saying, hurt people hurt.
Yes. Hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So many of the, like we heard again about another terrible school shooting in Georgia, and so many of those troubled kids who have broken homes or some terrible stuff that's happened in their lives, bullying or that has shaped them and made them that way.
And if the brain is not fully formed.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And they don't even have the ability to process the consequences. This is, you're going to change the trajectory of dozens of people's lives.
Tragic all around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts about that idea of the identified patient? Yeah.
I have been the identified patient on several occasions.
Yeah.
Especially when, now my parents are passed, but before they passed, when there was something major going on with a sickness or even at a passing, all my siblings, most of them are out of town, they're like, they come to me like, I'm the keypin. What, this one would have something to say, this one have something to say, I did this, and then all of a sudden, right there, all of a sudden, and then pretty soon I'm breaking out in this, and what I mean? Because
Like
at
you were
that
having
point,
a
I was
physical
being
reaction to
identified
all of
because
this.
all of the streams were coming to me, and I wasn't able to do what this one wanted to do, or I did this one wrong, or I should do this, or call this.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
and they would look at me like I would just blow up at them then, because, I'm tired, and now I'm the one,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't
So you kind of
realize-
felt like you were at the center
Yeah.
of all these forces coming together.
But I guess they figured that I must be the strong one, otherwise they wouldn't be calling me. So I'm not the weakest link, but yeah.
Yeah, when you're kind of at the center of all of this stuff, it can feel like it's my fault, or they're looking to me as if I'm going to be the savior, but none of that is true.
But then
It's
I
just-
get mad that I wasn't then I get mad at myself. But then I try to think,
Like
okay,
self-blame.
how can I do that differently? And then
Yeah.
I try to maybe ask them to take on part of it rather than
Right.
just dumping it on my plate. all
Yeah,
the time.
yeah. Yep. It can be really helpful to not just respond in the usual way, your knee-jerk reaction, but to think through, how can I handle this differently when this comes up next? Because it's gonna. What might be a way to kind of change the tone or change the line of the conversation. All right, so besides identified patient, the next family systems concept that I wanted to talk about today is homeostasis, which is about balance or equilibrium. In families, a lot of times it's this force that tries to keep things the same at all costs. Balance between these two, or imagine if this tug of war was actually like 8 ways or more than that. Everybody pulling and trying to keep things the same. It's this natural resistance to change in our lives. This urge to keep things the way they are and preserve the balance, even if it's unhealthy. People a lot of times get comfortable with relationship patterns in their family and unconsciously work to keep things the same, even if it's unhealthy, because they're used to it. And then when someone tries to change their behavior, they let go of the rope, or they try to pull really hard, then it disrupts the balance. And the rest of the family tries to pull them back in line, puts pressure on them to go back to their old behavior. They say, "What's come over you?" Or, "You're not yourself anymore. Why are you doing that?" You can think of it again like that pressure in the underground pipes. So many of our relationships have to do with emotional processes that you can't see a lot of times. And that pressure in the relational system is usually anxiety. It's when people's anxiety goes up that tends to limit their responses. They go back to the usual knee-jerk reaction. And so that anxiety and that those knee-jerk reactions kind of reinforces the equilibrium in the family. So you can think of it in terms of, or you can ask the question, is the way you are functioning or behaving helping keep the status quo, or are you helping the family system become more healthy, move in a positive direction? Does that concept of homeostasis, does that kind of make sense to you? What do you think about that? How have you seen that at work? At your work or at your family? How have you seen people try to keep things the same no matter the cost?
Yeah, because you go and look at some situation and you say, if I say something, it's not worth the aggravation.
Oh man, this is just wrong. But if I say something, I'm going to get all this backlash. That's that homeostasis, that force to keep things the same because it's comfortable, even if it's not good. What else? What other ways have you seen that at work in your own family or workplace? Yes.
When I used to work, I worked my way up from safety to vice president of the union, president of the union, steward. I had nothing but conflict. And I thank myself I was a German because I didn't take any. Really, that's how I got through what I worked. And then I got to be a plant chemist. I went on salary. Nobody liked me because I would point out things that were wrong.
Right? Yep.
And what they did, they sent me to Durez in North Tonawanda.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yep.
you know what happened there? They shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank the good Lord for let me live. I love all the people around, and I went to antiques. I loved it. So did my wife. So, I don't know, there's always an end point of, what can I say?
Yeah, yeah. When you try to rise above it, what forces typically come at you?
Yeah.
They try to hammer you back down in place. Why are you getting all so uppity? You know, why are you trying to change things?
So is this the way that we, in healthy ways or unhealthy ways, try to keep things in balance so that the family remains intact?
Yep, or just to have a sense of continuity,
Yeah.
or, yeah, because we don't like change.
There again, when they go to that therapist or whatever, it falls on the mom. Because why wasn't mom keeping all this balance, you know?
Mhm.
The mom has to balance everything.
Right. Yep.
Well, everything's
Yep.
changing.
Yeah, and families are way different today
Yeah,
than they
just
were.
like, I'm having a hard time getting my head around this, positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why.
Say more.
Well, because of the balance and the mom thing, you know, I mean, and the Bible, our
Mhm.
church,
Mm-hmm.
and the world's changing.
Absolutely.
So what's acceptable and not acceptable in your balance,
Mm-hmm.
in your home,
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
there's a lot of conflict there.
Right. Families look a lot different than they used to, and because of that, things have gotten a whole lot more complicated. You know, it's not necessarily wrong or different.
Family aren't gonna be, you're gonna be having a civil war within families, you know, going on.
Yep.
because,
Yep.
You know,
It's not traditional anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Tradition is the word.
I mean, I guess
Right.
we have to look for Jesus
used
in
to.
everything,
Exactly. Exactly.
even if
Yeah.
it doesn't look like what we
Right.
think it.
God can work through families that look way different. That, you know.
But you're not saying that it's either right or wrong to try to keep the equilibrium.
If it's a healthy equilibrium, that's great. But
Okay.
a lot of times it's not.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's a pattern of avoidance or conflict or distance or whatever. And when somebody starts to say, you know, I'm not going to act that way anymore, and they start acting differently, everybody else tries to pull them back down. It's kind of like, so many teenagers in school, for example, the ones who get bullied are the ones that are trying to rise above, you know, and they get yanked back down. It's like they're trying to keep everybody level, and so they, you know, anybody that starts to become a little more mature, a little, you know, advanced, they're torn down because they're like,
I think sometimes when a bully finally has had enough and they react, they're the ones that get in trouble. So then they're being bullied by the authorities, so that, you know, it's like they're just
mm-hmm.
getting hit with it, you know?
Yeah.
I think that families, while the children are at home, we try to keep everything on an equal level and do everything and pass it on.
Mhm.
But then they leave the house, okay, you make your own mistakes, you learn by them, and you can change whatever I've taught you, but you're gonna have to live by them. So I think
Mhm.
there's that always in a family,
Mhm.
you know, and then you accept it,
Right.
or have to accept it.
Yep. Yep. And kids learn so much from, you know, their upbringing, the way that they see their own family running. They think that the rest of the world runs that way, for good or for bad.
Sometimes
talk
when
more
you're
about that
trying
later.
to do something about it and you know you can't do it, you
Yeah.
just have to pray about it. And
Absolutely.
that makes it happen.
Yep. Ask for guidance, because relationships are tough, and yet they're vital. And if we ignore them, or if we, you know, just kind of turn a blind eye to the problems, the unhealth, the division, the conflict, the anxiety in the family, it's not going to just go away on its own.
But if the people, the system are not all willing to, I don't know, to anything, to talk about it or to be open to things, it's just so, like, I'm thinking in my extended family, my nature is to talk about things and work things out, which I know that I'm
Which I appreciate.
not a lot of people are like that. It's those conversations are hard, but
Yeah.
when I've tried to do that with my extended family, not my primary family, it has backfired to the point of people getting so upset because they don't want to deal with it that then there's like periods of time where the relationship is broken. So I've learned that in order to keep some sort of a relationship with some of the people in my family, I have to deny what I actually know is the right way to handle it, because that has only made things worse. It feels so unfair, but that's how the equilibrium in my extended family works, because which I don't really like my kids to see that, because I don't want them to think that that's the way to deal with it. But how do you, if you have people in your system that are not willing to deal with things in a healthy way, I don't know.
It's
Like, I'm not willing to let the relationship go.
So
Right.
this generation is struggling, but this is where our kids are struggling, is they've seen us do this. And they have the truth. I mean, they're just very honest generation coming up. And they see us putting things down. And that's what makes us hypocrites, I guess, in some way. It's like, you gotta be careful.
Yeah,
Because
we have to recognize that.
The
What else would you
generation
say?
coming up is very honest. They're very honest.
Which can be good or bad, the way depending on how it's handled.
Maybe there'll be a lot of hurt feelings. I don't know, but
Yeah.
they'll be true.
Yes.
What do you mean honest?
What do you think?
Like, she's asking kids.
No,
Oh.
when I mean
Yeah.
honest, I don't think that you would let somebody, well, you're not gonna let somebody bully someone. You're gonna stick up for what's true and right. It's a very clear sense of who you are, and I just don't think you're gonna let people lie to you.
See something, say something.
You're smart. You're smart enough to know what's right and true.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, most kids nowadays, they know if somebody's trying to pull a fast one on them. They're like, no, I'm not gonna believe what you said.
I wonder why that's different from generations in the past.
Maybe I'm just
That's a
like
good question.
started. I
I
mean,
mean,
you
if
know.
parents told us something, we would believe it. Nowadays, they question it. It's
More
like, no.
skepticism or yeah.
Well, the systems, you know, it's all laid out. There's science behind it.
Oh, yeah.
There's this, there's that. There's anything you want on your phone, you'll find it. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Which
easy to
again
find the truth.
can be good or bad. Right.
I have a situation that just came up. My one granddaughter's companion, I saw, I was at a birthday party for the granddaughter, he vapes. Now, right in the living room where everybody was sitting, there he is vaping. And they got a 2-year-old. And I'm thinking, now, do I tell her, I'm not coming over to your house anymore unless he doesn't smoke before I come, he doesn't smoke. If you want to smoke, go outside. How is that going to affect the relationship I have?
Yeah.
Because it's not only my health, but it's my in-laws' health, and it's the baby's health. Because
Right.
that vape gets all over the house, no
Oh,
matter
yeah.
what.
Oh,
Where's
yeah.
his common sense? And she's a nurse. So
Mhm.
where's her common sense?
Right.
Between them.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they're companions, they live together, so there's love, so how does she, how does that affect their love relationship?
Yeah. So, and there might be different ways to address that than
Definitely
just
different ways
saying,
you can say it.
you know,
Yeah, probably the
unless
science.
you change, I'm never coming
It's
back.
probably
You
more
know.
to the science of it. You know, they might understand that.
Well,
I should think they would,
Mhm.
but I would have thought that he would have had common sense
Yep.
in the first place, because that's his baby.
Right. Sometimes it's really helpful to ask good questions that help people get to see things for themselves. Sometimes it's helpful to use a little unexpected humor to get at it in a different, which kind of disarms a little bit. There's a variety of responses that we can use. The thing is that we tend to just kind of do the knee-jerk thing instead of really thinking through how we're going to respond in a helpful way.
Or it could have been that situation already addressed prior to you being involved
Mm-hmm.
in the change. The person would say, no, I'm not changing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So,
So, you give up.
Well,
yeah.
that's.
So there's so many forces at work in our families. Next week we're gonna spend some time talking about these other three concepts, or the ones that are family systems concepts that get highlighted in this book. Differentiation of self, which has to do with kind of your own self-regulation. Emotional triangles, how those that anxiety tends to flow between three people or issues, and intergenerational repetition, how things, patterns tend to happen over and over again in families. So, have a great week.